These protesters believe they are the defenders of democracy and freedom. Over the past decade, millions have joined the anti-globalization movement to prevent the spread of global capitalism.
We all want a better world, free from poverty and injustice.
I'm setting out on a journey, first to Taiwan to see how globalization leads to wealth and democracy. Second, to Vietnam to find out what multinationals are really doing to developing countries. And finally to Kenya to try and discover why Africa is still so desperately poor. Taipei, capital of Taiwan. Just 30 years ago, people in this tiny East Asian country were poorer than many Africans today. Malnutrition was widespread and there were no natural resources. Today, its people are as rich as the Spanish. Evidence of Taiwan's wealth is everywhere and rising. In the 10 years since they began modernizing, Taiwanese poverty rates were cut by more than half. Today, absolute poverty is virtually non-existent here, and real wages are 10 times higher than they were 40 years ago. This miracle only happened because the country consciously embraced global capitalism. But before a country can do that, it must have capitalism at home. And the first step towards that is land reform. If people don't own their land, they have no incentive to make it profitable. In the 1950s, the Taiwanese government began buying land from the old elite and giving it to the population. Yields increased rapidly, and Taiwan was supplied with food, releasing manpower for industry. Once, this was a farmhouse surrounded by rice paddies. It's where Mr. Wang once lived, and he still comes here to play mahjong with his friends. Mr. Wang illustrates how Taiwan benefited from land reform. His parents were poor farmers until the government gave them the land in 1968. Once he owned the land, Mr. Wang's father thought it worthwhile to build a mill. Today, Mr. Wang is a millionaire. He turned his father's mill into a factory, making those cheap plastic toys for which Taiwan became known in the 60s. His journey from rural beginnings to industrial wealth reflects how Taiwan has developed. At a nearby tea house, I asked Mr. Wang how it all began.
Toys, such as Barbie dolls, children's building bricks, sports gear like skateboards, stainless steel scissors with plastic handles. At the beginning, we were working 24 hours a day in shifts. The machinery in the past was more likely to cause accidents. You had to learn and absorb slowly. That's what caused the injuries to my fingers, because I didn't know better.
These early factories were sweatshops, but back then all Taiwan had to offer was cheap labor and long hours. Mr. Wang told me how the government's push for industrialization during the 60s meant his parents were encouraged to build their factory.
At that time, the then vice president was encouraging people to go into manufacturing industry by telling us, your home is a factory, the living room is a factory. Originally, we were growing crops. The field we were cultivating was given to my father by the government. The government was reforming at that time. They wanted to encourage small and medium enterprises. The government decided which land was for industrial use, which meant you could build a factory there. My father was given this opportunity, and so, of course, we made use of the land, and now our children are grown up and doing the same.
Mr. Wang's generation gave Taiwan sweatshops, churning out cheap goods for Western markets. Ugly blights on the landscape, yes, but don't oppose them. They were a transitory but crucial stage on Taiwan's road to riches. As Mr. Wang and his generation became successful, more and more factories sprung up, which meant there was an increasing demand for labor. Once industrialization was well underway, competition for labor made wages rise, so only really competitive companies could survive. Companies like Acer flourished by responding to competition with innovation. Stan Shi, Acer's chief executive officer, is known for inventing Taiwan's first desktop calculator and the world's first pen watch. Today, Acer is the 7th largest IT provider in the world.
This is the first machine we export to the international market. So this is 1981. We train about 3,000 engineers in Taiwan based on this type of machine. So I'm so happy about that. This is really great. And this is the first computer in end of 83. We introduced one of the first compatible computer in the region.
Oh, and where was this exported?
Almost everywhere.
Mr. Shi invited me to join him at his lunchtime workout in the company gym. I wanted to know what he thought was the key to Taiwan's success.
Was it easier to start a business in Taiwan than in other countries?
Yeah, I think so. People, they really like to own their own business. So we have a joke in Taipei City, they say every 6 person in the street, there's one chairman.
But 1 in 6 persons you meet on the streets have a company. Is there less bureaucracy and restrictions than in other countries?
I think so. The government regulation, of course, is reasonable, and even many people start the business without knowing all the regulation.
A deregulated economy provides the ideal circumstances in which Acer continues to thrive and innovate, constantly improving people's living standards.
What will be the products of the future that you will produce?
We recognize today we have a lot of technology, but how to do more application, to package in a way it's easier to serve the more population, I think is our vision. And make a IT like oxygen, okay? You don't feel it's existing, but it's so important to our daily life.
Across Taiwan, families reflect the country's progression. Grandparents were rural farmers, parents factory workers, and today's generation well-paid software engineers and businessmen. Fuji Chang works in IT in the capital and has a taste for expensive cars. Yet, like so many of his generation, his roots are far from the city. Together, we drove to Taichung, the town where he grew up.
My father was a factory worker. He worked much harder than us and was exhausted every day. He sweated while working and was always really tired. This is because our education levels are different. My brother and I had higher education, and I finished a master's degree. Our work is mainly office-bound, so our jobs are really different, as one is based on labor and the other on intellect. We used to be very poor, but now we are middle class, comfortably off. Most of my generation now works in the high-tech industry. This mirrors Taiwan's change in the last 20 to 30 years.
Fuji's mother still works in a factory. But for her generation, this was a step up from farming and meant parents could afford to educate their children properly. Rising prosperity also increases the returns on that education.
The previous generation made the paper boxes. The current one produces the goods and software to put in them. From bicycles and toys to CDs and computers within one generation. I think that sums up Taiwan's story of from rags to riches. Taiwan got rich by rewarding those who used the best ideas and technologies from all around the world. And they still do. Just look at this place, Cha for tea. They borrow the latest Starbucks concepts to make their own national tea traditions popular and trendy. And they are expanding, with new tea rooms opening in the US and Japan.
Vietnam, till recently one of the world's poorest nations. The vast majority of the population still lives off the land. But that's changing. And it's changing because the country is full of those sweatshops that the anti-globalizers are so keen to boycott. We've arrived in the capital, Ho Chi Minh City, once Saigon, and we're on our way to visit the flagship factory of perhaps the most notorious of those multinationals.
Say Nike to any anti-globalist, and they'll say sweatshop. Of course, I wouldn't want to work in one, but I've never said that globalization is a smooth ride. What globalization does is produce long-term benefits, which the protesters keep ignoring.
And it's these sweatshops which are the stepping stones to progress. Sweden too had its fair share of them, as did Taiwan. They're a necessary stage in any country's industrialization. The factory's general manager, Lalit Monteiro, showed me around.
What many protesters forget is multinational companies are made up of people. And people take pride in working for a company and they want to do the right thing. One of Nike's maxims is do the right thing, and our employees take that very seriously. So when people protest the brand, we feel that there's a responsibility not only from an ethical standpoint to investigate whether there's truth behind allegations, but also because our brand is one of our greatest assets. For example, Nike as a rule does not employ any workers in any of our contract facilities under the age of 18 for footwear and 16 for apparel.
Vietnam outlawed child labor in 1988, but the economy was still weak and parents relied on their children working in order to survive. But now the number of Vietnamese children in work has dropped by 2.2 million in just 10 years. People can now afford education, and more Vietnamese children are in school than ever before.
There's no incentive for a foreign invested company to hire child labor. First of all, it's not the right thing, but second of all, if a worker is found to have had a fake ID and snuck into a factory, we require the factory to pay for the worker to complete school and to continue paying them their wage. The average age in our contract partner factories is about 24 to 25 years old.
But I assume that they work here for a very low pay. Isn't this a way of exploiting cheap labor in a poor country, as many critics would say?
The average pay here is $54 a month, which compares to a local minimum wage of $18 or $19 a month for a state-owned enterprise. In addition, if you compare the wages to that of a doctor or teacher, they're not very far off. Many of these workers, they've come from an agricultural-based economy. They've had a chance, instead of working 10 or 14 hours a day in a field, to work in an environment that's clean, that's safe, that pays them a regular wage, where they get free or subsidized meals, and where basically there's an investment in their future training and education.
But Nike doesn't pay its workers more simply because it's generous, but because a multinational brings foreign machinery, new management ideas, a bigger market and education for its workers. These assets are what make a multinational so productive and so able to pay higher wages. In the canteen, I talked to some of the workers during their lunch break.
I was planning to go to Korea, so I had a break. After 2 years, I